Hello and welcome back to Comics Over Time. This season, which we're calling Murdock and Marvel, a history of Marvel Comics starring Daredevil, we're breaking down the year in the comic book industry in two parts. In part one, we'll look at the state of the comic book industry as a whole, as well as what things were going on in society that may have impacted the comic book industry during that year. We'll talk big picture about what's going on at DC and independent comics, then we'll shift our focus to Marvel. We'll look at who is creating comics, what new characters or storylines were introduced, and which comics debuted or ended. In part 2, we'll dive deep into Marvel's longest-running characters, Matt Murdock. We'll look at what the year had in store for the Man Without Fear, key things that happened, and who joined or left his world before spotlighting one key issue or story. From there, we'll wrap up the year's discussion with a takeaway before moving on to another year and a whole new discussion. We're excited to have you join us on a trip through comic book history. We are back with another new year. It's 2010, and oh boy, is it action-packed. Goodness gracious. My name is Dwayne. With me, as always, my good buddy Dan. Dan, we've got nothing to talk about tonight, do we?
Yeah, this is going to be a very quick episode. I'm lying.
In fact, both halves of 2010 are going to be huge because there's a lot going on in the comic book industry. And oh yeah, Daredevil's the villain in a crossover this year.
I think in relative terms, Daredevil is way crazier than the rest of the universe is. Like, Daredevil is more of a mess in terms of stuff to cover and things that it sort of bleeds into than it ever has been. And
yes.
It's going to be an adventure.
We are going to do something I have never done before, which is we're spotlighting 11 books this week. So next week, actually, I guess, since the Daredevil part is going to be in part 2, but good gosh, it is unbelievable because it's really important because you've got the main Daredevil run and then you've got an actual standalone limited series with the name of the crossover Shadowland. And you had to read both in order to understand what was going on because there was huge things that were happening in either title and they affected what was happening in the other title.
For those of you who've been reading comics for decades, this is Dwayne's first actual live exposure to a crossover. We've read crossovers when we were like getting ready for some of the, like Civil War. We read the Civil War miniseries, but it wasn't like he was reading regular comics and ran into the Civil War series, which is what's happening to us in Daredevil right now.
Correct. Yes.
So
this is we've always, to this point, Daredevil and Moon Knight, which we've focused on in the detail, have been kind of on the edge of the crossover as opposed to right smack dab in the middle of the crossover.
No, probably the closest was the Khonshu War.
Yes.
But that was just as we were finishing up Moon Knight and the like. So, and that was much smaller. All right. So.
We're getting ahead of ourselves. We first need to find out what was going on in comics this year. So let's get into the year in comics. The year in comics. All right, Dan, it was 2010. Last year was, I want to say it was slightly down.
Yep.
Did it rebound this year?
It did not. 2010 is an odd year though, in a lot of ways. It's actually pretty quiet in terms of there weren't a lot of crazy things that happened. There were some big things that happened, but it was quiet in this case, not in really that before the storm sort of way that we've seen before, but more in just everybody's putting their head down and making great stuff kind of way.
Okay.
So it's really a productive year in terms of a lot of the books that come out. Some of my favorite comic books ever came out this year. In fact,
really?
we're going to have a favorite book of the year, which is indeed one of my favorite books of any year. So I really think that 2010 has some great stuff to give us. So good work was done big things were happening sort of under the surface or behind the scenes, but really it's not like there was anything that really particularly roiled the waters too much. What you're going to find out is it was a slightly down year again, partly because the economy was still in the dumps, partly because due to some of that, the comic companies decided they wanted to try and hike their prices. And these days they don't do that by a dime or a quarter like they used to. They go from $2.99 to $3.99, right?
Oh, goodness.
And that did not work well. And it in fact is going to be something we see come back to haunt us, or that comes back into the news next year, especially with
Okay.
DC. So
Okay.
we'll see how this all kind of goes.
All right. Well, let's start with movie and TV, which is where we typically start. What was going on in the small screen and then in the big screen?
Yeah, sure. So I'm not going to go through what I have in previous years, all of the like animated shorts and direct to TV animated movies that DC and Marvel and some of these others are doing, just because they're actually getting to be so voluminous now that unless there's one that really, stands out, it's just a massive list to go through.
Sure.
What we do have though is Image actually gets into the action with a cartoon called Firestorm. So they've got I think it only goes like a season, maybe 2 seasons, but Image is getting in on some of that action. Paradox, which is a sci-fi slash film noir kind of show, airs on Sci-Fi. Stars Kevin Sorbo and a bunch of other sort of B-list actors.
Really? Okay.
It is badly panned for being not really ready for prime time, but it does come out, and so
Okay.
that was, I would say, one of those things that brings back nostalgia because it's the sort of terrible sci-fi movie that we would have expected in like the 80s or early 90s. Uh, there's also another little cable show on a channel called AMC that nobody's probably ever heard of. It's called The Walking Dead.
Oh
Um,
my. That's
AMC
right. That
was
started now. Okay.
AMC was at that time a station nobody watched, and that was just kind of a little tiny blip. Obviously, Walking Dead completely blew up their viewership and everything. Ended up going 11 seasons, 177 episodes. This, of course, was from the Kirkman comic series that had debuted on Image just a few years earlier.
I
Absolutely fantastic.
I absolutely loved that show for the longest time, and it was much must watch television for me for a very long time. And it was actually, I watched it all the way until the big cliffhanger season premiere with Negan killing a very important character who he does in the comics, and I knew that, but I didn't care. I was just done with the show at that point because it I Stephen Yoon's character, I can't even think of his name now. Was
You were not alone.
Yes.
There were an awful lot of people who started the series, and it had an almost Game of Thrones-esque sort of arc in some ways, with the exception that it is still far better thought of. Like people don't look back and rue the day they first started watching Walking Dead like they do with Game of Thrones. But this is a very successful, probably one of the most successful comic book adaptations ever put on television.
Yes. I will say, like, yeah, that I never read the comic before seeing the show, and I absolutely loved the show. I bought some collected works of the comic after watching the show because I liked the show so much. So it did sort of provide that gateway a little bit, trying to get me into comics. Um, like you would think, like you would think when with some of this stuff that got to be so popular into the mainstream culture.
Yep.
Glenn is the character that Stephen Yeun played that gets killed by Negan in the premiere, and it just
Spoilers.
It broke me. It broke me.
It's only been 15 years. Can we talk about this already? So, as a full disclosure, by the way, I am not big into horror. and I did not watch The Walking Dead. But I say it's fantastic because a lot of people I know who really like these things said it was awesome, and I'm just going to accept their word for it and continue to not watch it. So there you go.
It was very awesome for a very long time.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think, yeah. So definitely worth seeing. I know they have it. You can watch it on streaming services and stuff like that. So if you have not seen it, I would definitely recommend the first few seasons of it.
Yeah, and that also it is something where um, it's sort of the nature of Robert Kirkman to be very involved in everything that he's connected with. So he kept a lot of influence over the show as well and the direction of it and everything, which helped for a long time to sort of keep it on the right track, probably. Um, Now, should we talk about some things that are less successful? Because that's always sort of more fun.
Sure.
Time to see the train wrecks. So,
What else happened if it doesn't quite measure up to The Walking Dead?
these are going to be a long ways from that. So that's the end of the TV. But in the movie realm, we had a few movies come out. One was 30 Days of Night, Dark Days. There was a 30 Days of Night movie that was pretty successful. It came out low budget, nice box office. So it got a sequel. This is from that Niles Templesmith comic, 30 Days of Night, that came out a few years earlier. Sequel's absolute trash. Ends up going straight to video, does not make any money, and that was sort of, I believe, the end of that. There might be another one, but I don't think so. We also had a DC movie come out this year. Jonah Hex, who is a DC Western anti-hero, has been around for a long time. And Hex, of course, has a massive scar across his face. He's easily recognizable.
Okay.
Somebody who, all the time that he had been in the comics, even, he was sort of an anti-hero. Somebody who went around, he would regularly kill folks in the comics and the like, but would only do so because they drew first or because they deserved it or whatever, right? Kind of like almost like a Punisher in the Old West type of thing is one way to think of it. But
Fun.
they decided to make a movie on him. $47 million budget. You had Josh Brolin in the leading role, John Malkovich, Megan Fox played the leading female character. There was hopes for this early, but it ended up having a bunch of reshoots. There's talk of a lot of studio interference. The director, who was actually somebody that Brolin sort of recommended, ended up proving to be inexperienced and unable to really kind of bring the thing home. In the end, it ended up making 11 million at the box office on its $50 million budget.
Ouch.
And it did win at least one Worst Movie of the Year honor. Number Golden Raspberry Awards, all of this sort of stuff. The one thing that's craziest about it is almost always movies like this end up being these long, rambling things where you're like, oh, how did 80 minutes? It didn't even make it to an hour and a half, which is very unusual for a feature film. And so they couldn't even find, an hour and a half of usable material after they get done with this thing. Very bad movie. I'm a Jonah Hex fan, actually. It's one of the Western comics I liked best when I was young. My dad enjoyed them as well. Can't watch this movie again. I hated it. Interestingly, though, again, Josh Brolin, Thanos himself, he's been at this for a long time doing things in the comic book universe. So, next one, The Losers. This is another DC book. This one by Andy Diggle and Jock. A little bit better. It had a $25 million budget. It got back 30 million in box office. Also was about a 50% sort of fresh or rotten with critics. It's literally a 2 stars out of 5 movie, or 2 stars out of 4 movie, that has also been sort of like meh by the entire audience, right?
Okay.
It's very unusual to have a movie that makes about what you pay for. They usually bomb or they make good dough. So for it to have gotten 30 million, it's kind of weird. It's not a bad movie. It's not a great movie. It's just sort of there. This would have definitely been something that looks like the kind of stuff that Netflix has been putting out with a lot of its like direct to Netflix action movies lately.
Sure. So, okay.
But yes, that's an indictment on those films. In case you were wondering, they're not bad. They're just there. Although Chris Evans was in it, so our man in 2 comic book movies this year. Not even any of them Marvel. Scott Pilgrim versus the World came out, the other Chris Evans
Oh,
vehicle
sure.
in 2010. This one actually $75 million budget. Um, Edgar Wright got a substantial budget on it. He spent a lot of that money doing great effects and all the music and everything else. And the world said, this is just too weird for us. And he made not even his money back. So 51 million in the box office. This is one of my favorite comic book movies of all time. I absolutely love it.
It's really thought of quite highly now.
Yep.
It has got a very devout following.
Yep. At least one of the people in our house, my wife, actually hates it. She refuses to watch this film. She thinks it's absolutely unwatchable. But I love it. The kids love it. I think it's also interesting they've now done an animated sort of series based off it. The entire cast came back. So all these people, a lot of them went on to become major movie stars. You know, Brie Larson, Chris Evans, all these folks, Brandon Routh, whatever. They all came back for the audio and played their characters again. And there's even rumors that they all still have a group chat, that they're regularly just chatting with the other Scott Pilgrim folks. So it was a very close-knit cast. It seems like it would have been fun. And to me, it comes through in the movie that they're just having a blast. So
I saw this. I had never read the comics. It was weird. I didn't get it, but I do feel like I think I did enjoy it for the most part. Like it to your point, the special effects in it are just absolutely just out of this world. They are a visual spectacle.
It feels like, sometimes it seems like when you look at somebody like Zack Snyder, he recreates a comic book panel for panel. Whereas in many ways, I think that in Scott Pilgrim, Edgar Wright brings comic pages and comic scenes to life. Like when you see them sitting in the couch at the beginning and the band plays, you get this big zoom, or you see when he's peeing and the little meter goes down and whatever. And it's like all these weird things that were in the comic, and then they're essentially live animated in a way that just makes it a lot of fun to see the way he's playing with the syntax of comic books and the form and everything. It's a very clever movie that I really appreciate the look of it. The sound is fantastic. The characters are really well cast. So this is my favorite movie of the year. So there's a few other good ones coming up, but this is my favorite of the year.
All right. So beyond that, it looks like we have another few movies that actually did perform pretty well compared to the budget they got.
Going up in order, Kick-Ass came out. It came out originally from Marvel, but Mark Millar and his Millar World essentially owned the copyright on it. So Millar and Ramada Jr. did the comic originally. This ended up having a $30 million budget and took in $96 million at the box office. It is essentially a story about a couple of potty-mouthed, violent kids who one of them's an assassin and the other's out trying to look for vengeance. And lots of people were disturbed at just how much violence there was being perpetrated by children in it. So, yay, comics. That's what we say. Red came out this year. It's exactly the opposite. It's a bunch of geriatric assassins. So you have all sorts of these action heroes, essentially, who have been put out to pasture. So Bruce Willis plays one of the leads. You got Morgan Freeman, John Malkovich, Helen Mirren's fantastic in this. And they're all sort of trying to live their lives, and suddenly they've been decommissioned and the agencies decided to get rid of them. So they essentially blow up everybody else instead. This also, $200 million in the box office from a $60 million budget. The reviews on it were not great because the story isn't tremendous. It's just you've got a bunch of people everybody loves to see doing weird, crazy stuff. Sure. It was a true popcorn movie. I enjoyed it a lot. Then we get the big one of the year. Iron Man 2 came out. This is the second Marvel Entertainment movie, right? $175 million budget. Spent some money making it. Brought in 625 million at the box office. So made good money. There were decent reviews,
Yeah.
right? It did get an Academy Award nomination for special effects. Nobody says this is good as the first one. Many people, in fact, say it's one of the poorer entries in the MCU. There's also an Elon Musk cameo, which now is sort of aged poorly for me to the point where I might need to have a Musk, not Musk-free supercut of Iron Man 2 to watch next time I want to view it. But
you also have the switch over from Terrence Howard to Don Cheadle as
Howard had
James
a
Rhodes.
contract dispute and didn't like the fact he was not getting paid any kind of I think it's not only that they didn't give him a raise, but that in some ways they might have even wanted to cut his salary from the previous movie. Part of this is just from the fact that they're paying Downey Jr. ungodly amounts to play Iron Man because of the fact that he took the points and bet on himself in the first one, right?
Yes.
So because he said, I don't need much of a salary. I'll just work with you, and then I get a cut of the profits for every movie I play Iron Man in going forward.
It worked pretty well for him.
It worked pretty well for both of them, actually. I guess
that is true. This one I've seen a bunch because it seems like every time I turn on FX, they're playing Iron Man 2. But especially like in the last month or so, in the lead up to Fantastic Four, I think I saw it like once a week at my gym when I go. It is definitely not as good as the first one. There are some very interesting things about it. I think Armie Hammer in there as the villain. I think he actually does a really good job. And the special effects still look pretty good. Like we're not to the point in the MCU yet where the special effects are starting to get panned pretty regularly.
Well, and that's because at this point they're still way ahead of the game. Like the special effects that Marvel's putting out in Iron Man are sort of the state of the art. These are what everybody else wants to do, is be able to make stuff look like that. I think the thing to me that gets kind of crazy with it is that when you look at Mickey Rourke's character, it's a little bit of almost like what would you call it? A caricature almost in some ways, because it's so over the top.
Yes, it is.
Sam Rockwell similarly is just over the top.
He is.
And so there's a part of it that I think starts to get a little bit just too far away. But nonetheless,
and like the drunk scene in his house when he has the house party and it turns into him and Rhodey going at each other in different Iron Man suits. It's just there are definitely things about this movie that are not good at all. But it's okay. Like it is definitely not high on my list of terrible MCU films. They've definitely managed to make some worse quality ones than even this.
I'll always probably enjoy it, but I do think that it is one that, especially, and at the time, I think most of us enjoyed it. But in retrospect, it falls down just by comparisons. However, the quality level on this, we have to say, compared to the next two things we're going to talk about, is off the charts. Yes. What happened this year? I see you maybe looked ahead in the notes. You see what
I peeked ahead. Yes.
Believe it or not, during this year, there became a trend that started to be noticed by a number of the like folks who are doing year-end reviews and the like, and that was that evidently, like, pornography publishers had decided that superheroes were now popular enough with young males that making XXX parodies of a lot of the superhero movies or the superheroes was going to be a way to make some cash. So Superman XXX, a porn parody, came out this year. Batman Triple X came out, and also The Incredible Hulk. And these were then followed by a whole slew of, and we're not going to be mentioning them. We're just going to,
Good.
but
Good.
this
Go
whole
ahead.
new sort of wave of content opened up in 2010, evidently. So you know you've made it when suddenly the pornographers start copying you, I guess.
Sure.
So lastly, I don't even know where else to put this. So I'm just going to put it under movies and TV. For a few years, there'd been in development a play based on Spider-Man that was going to be like a Broadway musical. Actually, the book was written by a famous play writer from done numerous musicals. The music itself was being done with Bono and The Edge writing sort of the music for it. It had a $65 million budget, which was unheard of for musicals. And evidently, it was put on hiatus at this point as it was heading towards a 2011 debut, because they kept finding people having to be taken to the hospital because of the complex and dangerous sort of harnesses that were used to do the spider jumping.
Oh, wow.
And evidently, audiences were constantly afraid that they were going to get hurt because they didn't know who was going to come flying at them or what was happening. So this is something that's going on. But again, if you look at like that musical that we see about the Avengers in Hawkeye, that feels sort of like what I think this would have been if they'd actually, as you go out and look online, there are actually some videos in YouTube and things like this showing some of the things going on in this musical. It is crazy. So feel free to give that a try if you're interested. Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark is the
right.
What does that mean? Turn off the dark.
Yeah, I have no idea what that.
So in any case,
could mean. Let's move in. Let's move on and let's talk about what was going on in the comic books. What are we seeing if we open the pages of some of the books in the comic book store?
DC has an interesting year. They're actually doing what I think we're going to find Marvel's doing as well. And it's interesting how these two companies sort of independently move the same direction a lot. They're moving from what was called Blackest Night to a new series, a new crossover called Brightest Day in 2010, where essentially you kind of had the Green Lantern Corps and a lot of the DC universe get to this really sort of low level where everything is basically in danger of being completely destroyed, to Brightest Day, where now a bunch of dead heroes are returned to life, and you start to get a more hopeful look on the future and on these characters. We get Superman number 700, Wonder Woman 600, and Batman 700, all of which are a lie, I believe, because I think all of those books were canceled at least once in there, and then they renumbered them the same way Marvel's been doing. We had American Vampire come out through Vertigo, which I really enjoyed. It's kind of a almost like a noir, semi-modern take on a gothic vampire story, and really, really well done. Raphael Albuquerque's art in it is fantastic. Book called Day Tripper came out by Fabio Moon and Gabriel Ba. I will talk about that later, so we'll just put a pin in that for right now. Outside of DC, Archie actually added a gay character named Kevin Keller this year to the gang in Riverdale. What's interesting is they didn't make a big deal about it. They just sort of brought him in, and there was a couple of stories, and suddenly, there were girls were all trying to see if who could, get the new guy to be their boyfriend, and suddenly they find out he's gay and whatever, and nobody cares, and suddenly he's in a hamburger eating contest with what's his name, Jughead, and it just goes on. And it's actually weird because Archie's a pretty conservative company, but they had one of the best rollouts of a gay character, really, that any comic company's ever had, in that they just sort of did it without making a big deal of it, and everybody was like, "Oh, that's kind of cool." And it's weird how different it is in 2010 than it would be now.
Oh yeah, this would be a huge thing now.
Archie's doing this, and nobody cared. Everybody's like, "Oh, that's kind of cool. Probably overdue." DC also had Batwoman, who'd come out a few years ago, Kate Kane, actually get her own starring role in Detective Comics this year. Really, really well done as well. And that had been building for a few years. They'd had the character sort of doing bigger and bigger stories. And now she actually got to take over a starring role in Detective. Other books that came out that were well thought of. You got Coco Be Good by Jen Wang, Aphrodisiac by Jim Rugg and Brian Murdock. Parker, The Outfit. That's another one of those Parker books that I've been enjoying for quite a number of years now. We had Duncan the Wonder Dog by Adam Hines, which I have not read, but seems like it would be a pretty cool story. It's kind of a story told from the viewpoint of a dog. Phonogram the Singles Club, which is a follow-up to the original Phonogram series by Gillen and McKelvey. Absolutely fantastic. Those stories always seem like you're hanging out with people way cooler than you would ever be allowed to hang out with in real life. Sure. There's just something, when those two get together, they do the most amazing work. We had Scott Pilgrim's Finest Hour by Brian Lee O'Malley, Big Nate in a Class by Himself, and probably the most successful graphic novel of the early 21st century, Smile by Raina Telgemeier, which completely blew the doors off of all the sales charts. There were times when I think Smile actually outsold, say, Marvel in certain months and stuff like this. So Telgemeier is essentially a public industry upon herself at this point. But this was one of her first efforts. Kind of starts a little slow, but it's going to be a very, very influential book.
Okay. So let's talk about sales in industry then. So you said that sales were down a little bit again compared to 2009.
Yeah, you'd think that a 1/3 increase in the price would make things better, right? But no. So the prices went up, sales went down. Comic-Con had a summary for this year that said summer new comic sales were the worst since 2001. Only one issue after July topped 100,000 copies. DC reversed its increase to $3.99 and went back down to $2.99. It still didn't help, though. According to one DC rep, going back to $2.99 was the most popular and least successful move we ever made. So
no,
everybody loved the price reduction, but evidently they didn't buy more comics. So another weird thing you start to see is this year, over half of the top 20 individual book sales were number one issues. What's happening, that means, is people are buying number ones, but they're buying way less of number twos. So there's almost nothing that's keeping that actual sort of momentum going. The only ones that did were actually the big sort of event of the year for Marvel, which we actually did then have like 4 or 5 of the Siege books that actually did make it into the top 20. Overall, sales are down 3% to 418 million. Comics themselves, the floppy comics, went down about 5%. Graphic novels essentially held pretty close to even.
So when we talk about total sales, how were Marvel and DC? Is
Marvel still leads 38%.
Okay.
DC's at about 30%, and the rest of them are kind of just slotting in behind Images at like 5%, and everybody else is way lower. So the other thing, I mean, DC, we talked about them on some of their other, as far as the books they're making. But if you remember, they got over the last couple of years, they actually have been moving more and more towards seeing what Marvel's up to, making big movies, making money. Warner Brothers has owned them for a long time, but last year Warner said, we should tightly integrate a little more. And as part of that, this year, they actually moved the DC Comics publishing offices out to Burbank, California from New York.
Oh.
So DC had always been a New York-based company. Now it's going to be a California-based company. As part of that, Dan Didio actually is elevated up to co-publisher along with Jim Lee. Jeff Johns is promoted up to Chief Creative Officer, and Bob Harris comes in and takes over as the Editor-in-Chief. And Harris, if you remember, had been Editor-in-Chief over at Marvel before. So lots of new stuff going on. Dan Didio is going to be a name you'll remember. I have actually argued with Dan Didio in person in comic conventions at times.
Real?
he's an interesting guy. He likes to get out in front of fans and the like. I'm not sure that I like his direction that he takes DC, but I got to give the guy credit. He's somebody who's out there, and he's really somebody who loves comics and loves the industry and everything. So it is interesting to see. Jeff Johns similarly. Um, I think I have a lot of similarities in the way I think about the older heroes with Johns, but he takes things also in a direction there sometimes that it's very different. But promoting him made sense because he'd have been having a lot of sense. He's the one behind the Green Lantern and Flash rebirths. A lot of the better things that have been going on at DC over the last few years were actually John's inspired. So
Okay.
overall, probably some good decisions.
They ended up closing some of their what is it, like
Imprints.
imprints? Yep. Yeah, that was the word
So
I was looking for.
they had one called CMX Manga, which was a sort of a Western manga imprint. Wildstorm was Jim Lee's studio that had been folded in and now is actually closed down with Lee sort of moving into those different positions. And then also there was a Zuda webcomic site that DC had sort of been in on the ground floor of and had founded, and that gets closed this year as well. So, which is interesting because we're going to see overall digital comics are sort of where the market's kind of trying to go, but DC has already folded up their webcomic tent and moved on.
Okay. So what other interesting like industry related things are going on this year?
Bongo Comics, which is actually the ones who did the Simpsons comics and things like this. It's also one of the, along with Archie and the like, I'd say, along with Archie, probably the two main publishers who still did newsstand comics regularly. They actually dropped the Comics Code Authority seal. They were one of the last ones to still actually have it. And essentially nobody noticed or cared. And I think that told the industry a lot in terms of what the actual value of the seal was. I also think it's interesting that one of the reasons the seal isn't something that made a lot of people question when it went away is there's so few people actually thinking about or knowing about newsstand comics anymore, right? The number of kids out there buying comics is so low that there's not a lot of parents to get incensed by this. And so we are now 30 years into the direct market and probably 15 years since Marvel and DC essentially abandoned the sort of supermarket sales and stuff like this for the most part and really dug into the direct market. So we now have almost an entire generation of kids who have been raised in a world where comic books really are not a regular part of their life. Comic books are not something they're going to see when they go to a grocery store, something they're not going to see when they go to a convenience store, something they're not going to see when they go to a drugstore, right? So when they're out shopping with their parents, when I was a kid, there would be comic books at almost everything. I would see them, when we're at Kmart. I would see them when we're at the gas station. And that's not going to be the experience of these kids.
I even remember that.
No.
When I was when I was in grade school and stuff, I remember that even
that makes sense.
in the 80s.
Yep, exactly. So, and that would be the last generation. The kids who are about 10 years older than you, they would not have that experience. So it's kind of crazy. But because of that, Bongo dropping the seal, they'll be moving off the newsstand eventually here as well. But so we're seeing that kind of the code authority covered so few things at that point that I think most people didn't even really know what it was anymore.
Right. Digital comics though are big now.
Comixology actually is starting to become big. This is before they were bought by Amazon, when they were a sort of a standalone digital marketplace. They actually signed deals with Marvel and DC to be able to make their comics available on there. They also distributed all sorts of, small press comics, and they had some originals, and they had all of these other other publishers on there, and it just made for a great ecosystem, especially in terms of getting started. You could do a subscription service. It's a lot like what Global Comics is now, in fact. And part of the problem is that because of what Amazon does in a few years to tear it apart, we're just 15 years behind where we would have been, right? But Comixology at this point, because of the fact that the iPad just came out in 2009, and you're starting to see that there's this perfect comic reading device. I remember, did I go with you to get your first iPad? I think I seem to remember you were in on the iPad pretty early.
I was an original adopter of the very first iPad. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was something that they were really expensive then, but it
Yes,
was
they
obvious
were.
that they were going to be kind of this template for how you could read comic books on a tablet, you know? Um, and it's something that the market started taking a look at. And really, ever since the first iPads came out, the comic industry has been moving towards the idea that, look, this is going to be a way we can deliver product. It just has taken way longer than it should.
Yeah.
So,
But it does work. Like it is
oh,
my device now that is how I read comics now.
it's absolutely fantastic, especially if you get one with the bigger screens. It is really, really nice. But
Yeah.
the one I have is, I think, a 9-inch screen. Still works fine. I do turn it sideways. So, but yeah. Which one do you have?
I have the 11-inch, the
Oh, you do.
sized one. Yeah.
Look at you, Mister Lucky. Yeah. So, all right. So, a couple of other just weird little things. First one is something pretty cool, and that is that in Obama's Common Core language curriculum for essentially high school students or middle and high school, grades 6 through 12, for the first time, graphic novels are actually being included as part of that curriculum, or a respect for the usefulness of graphic novels and how they can be integrated into a reading program and more. So we're starting to see not only a little bit of respect from, Hollywood and whatever else, but actually librarians and educators start to realize that comic books actually do have a place within the reading ecosystem, especially for
Right.
kids.
And what's this last note about the Westboro Baptist Church?
So do you remember the Westboro Baptist Church?
I do not.
So maybe it was out of essentially in the early 2000s, there was this completely batshit small church, someplace in like Kansas or somewhere, that decided that it was going to start going and picketing gays, and it would picket at abortion places, and it would picket all over the place. But they were just vile in the stuff they did. They were very sort of aggressive and the like. And at and at the San Diego Comic Con this year, they decided to picket sort of the godlessness, almost the idolatry of superheroes and of sort of media and everything. So they came to picket. The Comic Con goers, evidently, I have to go and find video of this because it seems like it would be fantastic, decided to turn out in mass in cosplay and simply like viciously mock them while having a party and dancing and hanging out in front of them until they all just sort of left. Someone called it a spectacularly nerdy good versus evil event, and I would love to see footage of this actually, so I have to go and track it down. But yeah, the Westboro Church attempted to take on the Comic Con, and they evidently lost ferociously. So there you go.
That doesn't surprise me. I mean,
No.
you get a bunch of nerds and cosplayers and different things like that, and yeah, that's picking a fight above your weight class, I think.
Don't mess with them.
All right, so what about beginnings and endings? We had a few notable passings this year, it looks like.
Yeah, not not a lot of folks who maybe everybody would know, but Victor Jano, one of my favorite artists. He was also an editor at DC for a long time, but he was the inker on Neil Adams for a number of the Green Lantern books and things like this. He actually passed away this year. Frank Frazetta, who he's an artist and illustrator. He's known for comics back in the day. He's known more for doing things like the cover of Meatloaf's Bat Out of Hell album and some of the like crazy Conan Warrior type of paintings and stuff like this later on. So he's really a fine illustrator. And a lot of the stuff he did was used as like the covers of glossy Conan magazines and stuff like this. So Frazetta's art, though, is like hyper detailed and stylized. He had all of these crazy bulked up barbarians, and then the women in, tiny little chain bikinis draped at his feet and stuff like this. That was his style.
Okay.
And he was fantastic at it. He's also got one called Death Dealer, which is like a barbarian on a big war horse. That they're really iconic. The originals now are worth millions of dollars or something like this. And he is one of really the most successful people in terms of translating really from the world of comic art to the world of fine art. Because I think almost
Gotcha.
everybody would recognize that Frazetta completely belongs in any art gallery in America, if any gallery in America could afford it, obviously. But
Sure.
yeah. And then we lost Harvey Picar, who we've talked about a few times, the guy who
We have, yeah.
did American Splendor and the like. Sure, he went to the grave just as angry as he'd been for the last 30 or 40 years. So Godspeed, Harvey Picar.
So 2010 was the first year for C2E2, it looks like.
Yes, yeah. So my favorite Comic Con. We go to that every year. The family have a great time. It started out this year. It was a convention called Wizard World that was in Chicago, and they went up against it. And it turned out the city was big enough for two major cons, at least for a while. And C2E2 is still there, and Wizard World isn't. So I guess they did them in and took over.
We had a new publisher in 2010 that
Yeah,
started out.
Talk about publishers. Well, not really. So
Okay.
normally, when we talk about new publishers, there's somebody who comes in and, maybe they're not a great publisher, but they're around for a while. The biggest new publisher in 2010 was called Kickstart Comics Incorporated, as far as I can tell, which put out a total of 14 issues, not series, issues before folding. Biggest exiting publisher was Harris Comics, bit over 300 titles, going all the way back to 1991, mostly of like the Vampirella and creepy sort. Neither of these, though, massive publishers. And it's interesting because what it shows is anybody who was already going to have trouble has dropped out in the last couple of years with the recession and whatever. We're now in a very stable time in the comics industry.
Yeah. Nobody new coming in. No, pretty much everybody that is in is able to hang on, and so nobody's really leaving. Okay.
Yep. What are the Eisners?
All right. Let's move on and let's talk about the Eisners for 2010. These would have been the 2011 awards for work done in 2010. Dan, what are some of the notable stories and creators that we should note from the Eisners this year?
So the best single issue or one shot was a cool comic. It's called Hellboy Double Feature of Evil. It's by Mike Mignola, who writes a lot of them. But Richard Corbin was the artist. And Corbin does not do a lot of comic stories. That was pretty cool. So that's well deserved, I think, that they honored that. Best continuing series, Chew, which we talked about last week, but it wasn't really necessarily my thing, but it was awesome. Won that. Best limited series was Day Tripper by Fabio Moon and Gabriel Ba. Best new series, American Vampire. Best publication for kids, Tiny Titans. And again, in 2010, my kids are 6 and 4, and they're exactly at the age when these books were most needed, and they absolutely loved them. That was the book that my son basically wanted to read of my comics. Best publication for teens, Smile by Tegelmeyer. Best humor population, I Thought You'd Be Funnier by Shannon Wheeler. Anthology, we had a Mouse Guard book, digital comic, Abominable Charles Christopher by Carl Kerschel. And Kerschel had been a traditional comics artist for quite a while, but he moved into digital and did that series. Best graphic album reprint was actually the Wednesday Comics album. I liked this because the Wednesday Comics was a little difficult sometimes to collect and the like. This reprint was really well done. Best U.S. edition of international material, it was The War of the Trenches by Jacques Tardy. Best U.S. edition Best U.S. edition for Asian material, Noah Urasaki's 20th Century Boys. 20th Century Boys is a really interesting story, so that's pretty cool. Best writer, we get Joe Hill from Lock and Key, or Stephen King's kid. Best writer artist, Darwin Cook from the Stark Parker books. They're so fantastic. Scotty Young gets Best Penciler. Best cover artist, Mike Mignola. Best coloring, Dave Stewart. Best letterer, Todd Klein returns. He cannot be held down for long.
Yeah, so
Best
can't lose. He can't lose his award too many years in a row.
Correct. Best comics related periodical, Comic Book Resources website got it. This is the first time a website's won that. Best comics related book is Art of Modern Myth Making by Paul Levitz, which is a fantastic. So it's called 75 Years of DC Comics. Fantastic sort of retrospective of DC by Levitz, who's a guy who absolutely knows everything about DC. He served in just about every job you can at that company. And then the Hall of Fame, Ernie Bushmiller, Mort Drucker, Jack Jackson, Martin Nadell, Harvey Picard, Roy Thomas, Lind Ward, and Marv Wolfman. It's interesting that Thomas and Wolfman, of course, go in the same year. They're both sort of classics of the early Silver Age, or I guess we'd call it the late Silver Age, early Bronze Age for Marvel. Wolfman, of course, did all that stuff like the Tomb of Dracula, and then went into Teen Titans at DC. Roy Thomas was essentially Stan Lee's chosen replacement, who wrote all those great Avengers books and edited a bunch of stuff. It's been a huge part of Marvel's past. And then Jack Jackson did all sorts of really cool independent stuff, including a bunch of historical based stories that I absolutely love. I'm glad to see that he got into the Hall because he's somebody who really, I do respect the work of a lot.
Marv Wolfman reminds me just that I know him because he did a bunch of Daredevil stories.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
Including like introducing Bullseye.
There you go. That's correct. Yeah.
All right, Dan,
That's
before
everything.
we move on and talk about Marvel, what was your favorite non-Marvel comic in 2010?
So in 2010, every month, my favorite day of the comic book calendar was the Wednesday when Day Tripper came out. This is, in my opinion, the best comic book story of the 21st century. I absolutely love Day Trippers. Written by Fabio Moon, drawn by Gabriel Ba. The two of them are brothers. They're born, I believe, in Brazil. They do fantastic work across all sorts of stuff. They do crazy books. Umbrella Academy, Casanova. They work on a bunch of things for Marvel and DC as well, but a lot of their stuff is very eclectic and sort of iconoclastic. What is fantastic about this story is that it begins with that first issue, telling you the story of this writer going to his father's funeral. And at the end of it, something happens. And you're like, oh. And then the next book starts up, and nothing makes any sense at all. And at the end of that one, there's a cliffhanger, and you go, oh, how does this work? And then the next month, it starts over, and you have no idea what's going on at all. And it gets to a cliffhanger. Like, I'm really, really starting to wonder what's happening here.
Sure.
But the beautiful thing about it was that while I was waiting every month, more than any other comic book I think I've ever read. My mind returned to it. And I'm like, what exactly is going on? What's happening with this guy? And how are these stories connecting? And how are these stories even happening? And then as you get farther and farther along, at least for me, I started to make connections. And I'm like, hold it. I wonder. And then you get to the end and the whole thing pays off and it makes sense.
Oh
And it's
man.
beautiful beyond imagining. And I just
Wow.
love it.
Sure.
It's beautifully drawn, beautifully told story. But I think the thing I love best about it, the thing that makes it to me the best comic story, is that it uses the serial nature of comic storytelling, that once a month hit of dopamine you get, better than any other comic book I've ever read.
Oh, okay.
It takes advantage of, in many ways, what is one of the biggest drawbacks to the medium. Because it does feed you the story in a way that it encourages you to sort of dialogue with it while you're waiting for that next one to come out. I'm kind of sad whenever I see that they brought out like a Day Tripper, Ultimate or whatever, where it's just the whole thing collected into one big book. Because I don't know that Day Tripper is anywhere as near as good if you read it in a graphic novel or you read it in a collected edition, as if you get that perfect experience I had of being completely and totally lost and having
and
to
having
figure
all
your
this
way out.
extra time to think about it
You
in
know,
between.
because when you get to the end, you're like, oh, it really was the journey. I needed this time. And so, yeah, Day Tripper, more than any of the other favorites that we've talked about in a long time, this is just an absolutely monumental comic book, in my opinion.
All right. Sounds like a fabulous favorite for 2010. Let's move on and let's talk about Marvel and what they were doing in 2010.
Absolutely.
The year in Marvel.
Excelsior!
Okay, so we got to look at industry as a whole, what was going on in TV and in movies. What was Marvel doing? Did they I feel like last year in 2009 they had a big increase in the number of series they were doing. They were flooding the comic book stores. Surely they didn't keep that up.
Nonsense. Last year they barely published any comic books at all. What are you
No,
talking about?
that is not true. I feel like they hit a high water mark for like the first time in like 15 years or something last year in 2009.
Yes,
And
they did.
and
They published the ridiculous total of 681 different titles, of which 513 were new last year. This year, they published 710
oh
titles,
god.
547 of which were new.
So they managed to outdo it.
Oh yeah, there's even as the industry's contracting, even as everything's going kind of into reverse, Marvel's just pumping out content. And you can even see that as we get to the number of creators credited, they're doing all these sort of dredging things up from previous versions to be able to put out new books without having to hire people, because we have 853 different people credited in stories this year.
God.
Which means basically everybody who's ever worked for Marvel is reprinted somewhere into this year, right?
Oh wow.
So yeah, it's crazy. 552 of those series ended. So we actually do have more series ending than we do have starting. But that's still an awful lot of books in any case.
Yeah. And we had 5 books that were over 100 issues.
Yep. So this is my new metric. I'm interested to see how many books have actually made it to the 100 mark. And it's at this point, Uncanny X-Men, Amazing Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, Daredevil, and X-Factor have crossed that mark. And so
Right.
we'll see how long they keep at it before they get chopped down and are rebooted.
So, what were some of the big comics then this year, or the best-selling comics for Marvel this year?
Best selling was the reboot of Avengers with Bendis, Avengers
Sure.
#1, the reboot of X-Men, X-Men #1, and then those Siege books that were the primary event books for the year, where Norman Osborn is essentially taken down and replaced by Steve Rogers after he decides that it's a good idea to attack Asgard. So there you go.
Okay.
So if you remember,
Well,
Straczynski had put Asgard down in like Oklahoma.
yes, that's right. That's right.
Mhm.
So they then attack
Yep, he attacked it.
Asgard in. Okay.
And I believe
Well,
specifically against the orders of like the government and the president and everybody else. And so,
well, yeah, I don't think I would want to piss off the Asgardians.
doesn't seem like a good idea. But there
No.
you go.
Yeah. So let's talk about the events then. It looks like, oh gosh, there are a number of events for Marvel this year.
It's the nature of Marvel now. Everything turns into an event. Things that had over, say, 10 books that were an event or a crossover between multiple titles. We have the Thanos Imperative, World War Hulks, Do More, X-Men Second Coming, the Heroic Age, which is the big one we'll talk about, which had 116 titles. Shadowland, which is actually the second biggest crossover with 31. We'll talk about that next week. Curse of the Mutants, Wolverine Goes to Hell, Avengers The Children's Crusade, Chaos War, all are multi-book crossovers running between different parts of the Marvel Universe this year.
I hadn't actually seen that the list went down to a second page. My goodness.
Yeah. So, but again, the big one is Heroic Age. Heroic Age is essentially after Siege ends and Spidey punches Norman Osborn into like next week and everybody's happy. We essentially get this idea that now the systems that have been corrupted by Osborn, Steve Rogers is the man to come in and make it all better and sort of put us back on a regular footing where the heroes are on top and they're the ones we're focusing on, and it's not a bunch of villains in cosplay. So yeah.
And as we talked about at the open of the show, Shadowland is the big crossover that Daredevil ends up being the villain for, that we're going to be spending a lot of time next week talking about.
Yeah, that one's crazy. So it's an interesting year. A lot of these are pretty dark. It's also possible, I'm not sure, but I think Do More could be one that is going to be something that'll come up and we'll be hearing about more as a lot of the stuff heading into the next series of Fantastic Four movies and whatever else comes up. Because I think some of the stuff from Do More might make its way into a lot of the
Doomsday
Doctor Doom,
and
Doomsday and all that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
So
So what about other big things going on in the Marvel comic books?
it's an interesting year for Spidey, because Spider-Man actually kind of gets a reintroduction of all his villains in the Brand New Day era. They call it the Gauntlet, and essentially it's just Spider-Man sort of one by one having to go through all of these bad guys and get beaten up by them and whatever, and just it continues to spiral down. We also get something called One Moment in Time, which is Joe Quesada essentially going back and detailing the time when Peter Parker and Mary Jane dated back in the day in the New World. So he's in trouble with fans, obviously. He knows that people are incensed about Peter and Mary Jane, so he tries to sort of soften the blow a little bit by having this story. It's like a 4-part story or whatever. Nightcrawler died this year. The Avengers get rebooted, like we said, under Bendis with Ramada Jr. drawing. Secret Avengers comes in as a Black Ops unit, and our man Moon Knight is actually part of that.
Okay.
Turns out he's still just as bad at being a part of a team as he ever had been before.
Sure.
There's a book called Young Allies that comes out this year, which is an attempt to start a younger super team, kind of like an Avengers team, right? Unfortunately, characters like Nomad and Aranya just are not getting it done, but this is a good start. And what we're going to see is that they have the idea of a bunch of young folks in a team kind of like the Avengers. Now, if they would just make young Avengers, they'd be in good shape. And so next year, that's what they're going to do. So we're going to start getting into this. But so for right now, we've got Young Allies. And then lastly, for fans of the Venom Carnage part of the world, the Venomverse, Carnage returns after a number of years where he's been thought dead. So we get that character back as well.
Let's talk about new series, notable new series that end up going on a year or more.
So there's a lot of them because a lot of books got canceled when they did the Heroic Age. So X-Men and Avengers Academy both are going to go over 40. Wolverine, Secret Avengers, Uncanny X-Force, Avengers, New Avengers all go over 30. Incredible Hulks, Daken, Dark Wolverine, Marvel Adventures Spider-Man, Marvel Adventures Superheroes all get 2 years. And then Punisher Max, X-23, X-Men Forever 2, Deadpool Max, Deadpool Core, and Marvel Superhero Squad all get a year. We also have Namor, the First Mutant, Iron Man Legacy, and Scarlet that go 10 issues or more. Which actually, this is a pretty good list compared to previous years. There's a lot of things here that stick.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say.
But that's partly because they rebooted so many things because of the Heroic Age.
They kind of had to had to have a few that stuck.
Yep, exactly.
So what about limited series? You've got a note here that there were a lot of them that are notable.
We're running long, and I just give up, man. There's 129 miniseries this year. That's not counting one-shots. That's not counting collected editions. That's like 3-issue or more miniseries, 129 of them.
Wow.
Which means essentially you're talking 10 a month. Do you have any idea what that does to people's wallets when you're bringing out 10 limited series a month? So because of that, mainly all I really want to say is you had the Siege series, which was important. The Noirs ended. A lot of characters got sort of small few shot books in like the Daredevil Shadow, I can't remember.
Shadowland.
So like in the Daredevil Shadowland, you've got the Moonlight miniseries that comes out of Shadowland and stuff like this. There's a lot of them that are little connecting series or whatever. But it's really exhausting. And I'm just going to choose not to even deal with it because we've got a lot of other stuff to talk about.
Reasonable. We are running a bit long. So let's move on and talk about, certainly with all these books, there's got to be some interesting characters that come out of these books.
You would think so. You would be wrong.
We've seen this before. We've seen big year of comic books, like large numbers of new comics, or like limited series, new series, all this. And it just doesn't equate to any memorable characters or any characters that really have a lot of staying power. This is, again, another one of those years where the list here, I don't recognize really any of them on this list.
No. And I think the problem really, when it comes down to it, is that when you are just throwing things at a wall, you don't have time to really make anything interesting, right? So Jimmy Hudson, who is a sort of like an alternate dimension son of Wolverine, I believe he's been brought over into the main universe now, but he came out in Ultimate X #1. You have the Avengers Academy students, people like Finesse, Vale, Hazmat, Stryker. You had the Future Foundation in the Fantastic Four with Hickman. In here, you do have a few characters who are new, but a lot of these are characters like Alex Power, Valeria Richard, Franklin Richards that we'd already seen. They were just bringing them in and putting them together as a group more than them being new characters. We got Troll from Thunderbolts, Transonic, Velocidad, Oya, and Primal are all new sort of mutants that came out in Uncanny X-Men. And then probably the biggest new character is not a new character. Kevin Masterson had appeared before in the books, but his first appearance as Thunderstrike is in 2010 in Thunderstrike #1. So, yeah. But that's also, I mean, it's a named character, but not a big character. So you look into 2011 where we're going to have some very big names come in, and it looks even worse.
Yeah, I guess I recognize Hazmat from Marvel Snap, but that would be the only one there that
Yep,
I even has any real resonance.
exactly. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. They they really didn't get a lot in this year either. But like I said, next year we're going to get there. And that is one of the things. Again, they're making good comics this year. And really, this is a season about resetting the Marvel Universe to be someplace really where it's ready for new characters to come in.
Okay.
Previous years, a new character comes in, Norman Osborn's goons kill them, and then it's not a lot of fun.
Sure.
Right? So, yeah.
All
So
right.
wait, next year I've got a couple of pretty big names for you.
Okay.
Folks who have big roles in the MCU and also in the comics.
All right. Let's talk about ending series this year. So you said a lot of books sort of came to an end because of the Heroic Age
Yep.
event.
Absolutely. So New Avengers ended, which was the Luke Cage Avengers. Marvel Adventures Spider-Man ended, and you saw they just relaunched it this year as well. Ms. Marvel ended. Wolverine Origins, Mighty Avengers, Nova, all of those had made it 36 issues or more. Avengers The Initiative, Incredible Hercules, X-Force, Cable, Guardians of the Galaxy, and X-Men Forever all had gone at least 2 years. Wolverine First Class, Marvel Adventures Superheroes, The Dark Avengers, Punisher, and that's Dark Avengers is the one with like Bullseye as Hawkeye and stuff like this. Punisher, Wolverine Weapon X, Dark Wolverine, Marvel Adventures, or no, that's Official Handbook of the Marvel Universe, Deadpool Mark with a Mouth, New Avengers, War Machine, Black Panther, Runaways, Spider-Girl, and New Avengers, as well as Web of Spider-Man, all made it at least 12 issues. And they all got canceled.
Yeah, that's
Plus, down at the bottom of that list, Vengeance of the Moon Knight. It's 10 issues is, I think, the second shortest Moon Knight series. So we had one that got summarily canceled after like 6. And this one made it 10.
Well, the problem is Vengeance of the Moon Knight is
now it's been reused.
It's been reused in 2024.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about the bullpen. You said there was just an absolutely ridiculous number of creators that were credited this year. 853, was it?
Correct.
Okay.
Indeed.
How many new creators getting their first creator credit in 2010?
First time Marvel staffers, 130 of them this year.
That's a lot.
Yep.
And I see you have specifically a passing for Marvel that occurred this year.
Yeah, and really this is unfair because most people would say Al Williamson's best work was done at EC or maybe even in some newspaper strips and stuff like that. But we know him pretty regularly as a very, very good anchor on a lot of Daredevils in the last.
Yes.
So he worked on Flash Gordon. He worked in EC Comics. Passed away this year at age 79.
Right. So if we're thinking about those 130 new creators this year, who are some of the top picks that were considered for Rookie of the Year?
So before we do that, I just want to note there's one other thing in the staff kind of thing that is important.
Okay.
Marvel created a team of what they call architects this year. And they actually identified that Brian Bendis, Matt Fraction, Ed Brubaker, Jonathan Hickman, and Jason Aaron are now the architects of the Marvel Universe. Like the 5 people who sort of get together in a council of reeds type of scenario and create the ideas of what the overarching direction of the Marvel Universe is going forward. And as far as I can tell, rather than really them sitting around in a little brain trust, it's just that each of them's kind of responsible for a segment of it. Like Bendis is in charge of Avengers, and Hickman's in charge of the FF, and Brubaker's in charge of Captain America or something like this. They all have their little
I'm
fiefdoms.
assuming Jason Aaron has something to do with Thor and Cosmic.
This time, I think it was maybe more Cosmic at this point, but it's going to be Thor very soon.
Yes.
So when they're announcing this, basically they're like, you're going to see this in 2011. Aaron takes over Thor in like late 2011, early 2012. So, and then Fraction and Brubaker both are doing X stuff at one point. So I'm not sure which one of them is on that. I think it might be Fraction right now. But in any case, these guys are going to be doing that. So these rookies coming in, that's who they're looking up to. That's who they want to be, are the architects.
All right.
So,
all right, let's shift back now to the Rookie of the Year. Who were those that were in contention for the Rookie of the Year award this year?
So basically, there are a lot of people who did not do a lot of stuff this year. And partly that's because we are now getting a little closer, but it's been, 15 years.
Yeah.
So there's really only 3 people who've had more than 100 interior credits from Marvel since this, up through the end of 2023 or whenever my database was last updated. Travis Latham, who is a letterer, good letterer, has done 1,059 books. So he was busy, right?
Yeah.
Rochelle Rosenberg, who we know pretty well,
yes.
is a colorist, does fantastic work. She's been on Moon Knight for a long time and is really somebody who does colors that are just vibrant and cool and interesting. And I think she's really added a lot to Moon Knight while we've been watching it. Also does a ton of other Marvel books. She is sort of a senior colorist for the company at this point, and is somebody who essentially that's who she works for. She's an in-house colorist for Marvel. And Declan Shelby, who has 111 credits. He, of course, also of Moon Knight. He was one of the first people to really draw Mr. Knight regularly. He wasn't the first one. Michael Lark did the first one in that Secret of Avengers book, where essentially the Mr. Knight guys first came out. But he's really the one who popularized Mr. Knight and figured out how it would work.
He was the first. He was the first one to do it in a Moon Knight series.
In an actual Moon Knight book. Yep, correct.
Yeah.
And other than that, I like Felipe Andrade's work a lot. He's had 80 credits. And then we have G. Willow Wilson with 52. I think she leaps near to the front, even with that tiny number of actual credits, because the books that she was involved with were the launch of Kamala Khan. So she is really if not the only one, because there's a lot of people involved in the creation of the Kamala Khan character. They've been sort of brewing up that they wanted this character to be added for a while. But I think that Wilson really had a massive influence on it. So you can call her a co-creator or a primary creator of Kamala Khan / Ms. Marvel. It's not a lot of people who've made that kind of impact on the company by bringing a frontline character in like that. But there is one person who has, and I think the character's had even more impact.
Okay, so then who is the winner of the Rookie of the Year for 2010?
So first off, apologies to Rochelle Rosenberg, because I actually would prefer to pick her. I love her coloring, and I think that it is something that really, she's a special talented color, right?
Yeah, but I've been very impressed by I always liked the coloring work that I've seen the books that she's done.
Yep. But Kelly Sue DeConnick, well, she's only done 57 books up through 2023 for Marvel, and does a lot of work on other books, right? She's actually married to Matt Fraction and does some work with him and a group of friends that all are kind of involved in making indie comics and things for other publishers and the like. She also recently did like a Wonder Woman series that just absolutely blew me away and the like. So she's out doing great stuff in the world all over, and that's not necessarily Marvel. But when she was there, she created the new look Captain Marvel. Yep, and made Carol Danvers essentially Captain Marvel for the first time. And she defers and says, it wasn't just me or whatever, but she's the one who actually convinced them to go out and get Jamie McElvey to design the new costume. She's the one who wrote all of those first books. Her family actually is kind of a little bit represented in it because she was evidently a military brat. So she sort of used some of that to fill in the background. I think it's very clear that the Carol Danvers we have in the comics now would not exist without Kelly Sue DeConnick. And there's not a lot of people. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. And she was instrumental in bringing that Carol Danvers to the MCU because I remember watching some of the behind the scenes things for some of the movies, and she was brought in to help with creating Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers in the MCU as well.
Yep. And the number of people in this list who have co-created characters or revamped characters who have $1 billion movie in their back pocket is exactly one. So I'm just going to go with that and call it good. The comic's really just awesome in general. Well, pretty much if she's working on a book, it's going to be fun to read. It's also going to be controversial because she is unabashedly unwilling to put up with shit. And so if there are especially like the misogynists out there and the sad little men, she will go out of her way to cause them stress. And it's kind of fascinating and fun. So there you go.
All right. Congratulations to Kelly Sue DeConnick, your Rookie of the Year for 2010. I think that's a fantastic choice. But Dan, we are running long. But before we go, your favorite Marvel comic from 2010.
So I had largely given up on Marvel after 2 years of the Dark Avengers nonsense and all of this. I really hated all of that. So for me, the only book I was actually happy with, because Daredevil also at this point, the 2010 Shadowland series, reading it over now, I'm nostalgic maybe, but I've been enjoying it. But I know I did not enjoy it at the time. And so Hickman's FF is the only Marvel book I actually really looked forward to in 2010. So I would say that has to be it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Next week, just a word of warning, next week is going to be a long episode because there's just no way we can cover the amount of things that happened to Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil, in 2010. It's going to take forever. And like I said, we're going to be spotlighting the main run and the Shadowland books, and it is. But they were good. Like, if a little convoluted, but they were really good.
A little convoluted.
I mean, you're talking about Daredevil running the hand. So, and the foreshadowing of course, I'm going to be able to lead the hand, and nothing but good things are going to happen to the world as a result of it. Obviously, there's no way that could turn out poorly.
Couldn't go wrong at all.
All right,
it's a disaster. Disaster.
That is a discussion for next week. For now, we're going to wrap things up. We'd like to thank you all for joining us. If you're new to the podcast, please consider subscribing on your podcast player of choice. That way you'll get each new episode as soon as it's released. Now, if you've already subscribed, we'd appreciate it if you'd share the show via social media or leave us a review. That'll help other new listeners find the show that much easier. Now, whether you're new to the podcast or you've been with us from the beginning, we'd love to get your thoughts on this week's show. We had some homework for you. Asked you your thoughts on when we should maybe give up on the comic portion and focus more on the books coming soon, and then what we were thinking, what you're thinking we should maybe look at doing when we get caught up to modern day Daredevil. Still looking for some feedback on that. You can send us those comments via email. That address is comments@comicsovertime.com. Or if you're really succinct and can do it in a short message, you can send us that via Blue Sky. We are at Comics Over Time there. Wow, that was a lot, Dan. I can't even imagine. Like, we talked Iron Man 2, we talked Scott Pilgrim versus the World, we talked about like a million crossovers for Marvel this year. Goodness. And then we're going to have another huge week next week where we're talking about Daredevil as the villain in one of those crossovers.
Yeah, it's going to be nuts. Yeah, this year, all the years coming up though are going to be insane. Just so you know, because there's just so much stuff.
And it also brings to an end the current Daredevil run that we've
Volume
been
2.
Yeah,
Yep,
volume 2 comes
ends.
to an end at the end of this event. So you'll find out why next week.
Absolutely.
Until then, take care, everybody.
See you later, folks.